Okay, hello again, welcome to another Retropower Uncut. So we're going to start with the Mustang because I don't think we featured that at all last week and a couple of people were asking where it was. And I think last week we were just doing the finishing touches on the axle. If you think back, we had all the casing powder coated, it was all new stuff, Ford 9-inch supplied by Steve at Hauser Racing. So once we'd got all of the components built up in that, we did the brake line fit up on that, got all the drums assembled, and that was really the last thing we needed to be able to get the car rolling. So earlier this week, we just got this literally jacked up on our hydraulic jig lifter and put the axles in it, and that's because we had everything organised and ready to go with it. They just went straight in and it's rolling just like that. So next step really is going to be engine and transmission in, which again is completely ready to go. The only reason we're holding fire on that is that we want to do all of the bulkhead related work just while it's easier to access the bulkhead. So Adam's just been doing a bit of research on the various grommets and things that we need for the bulkhead, and we might look at getting the wiring in there and any bits of plumbing that will be easier to do before getting the engine and gearbox in. And as soon as we've done that, we can stick the engine and transmission in, and that'll be another big step forward on that. So that's pretty exciting. It's just got its original wheels that it came here on at the minute. I think they will be replaced eventually. It doesn't look terrible on these, to be fair, but they're a bit scruffy looking when you look close. So they'll be swapped eventually, but that's where we're at with that. If we back up over here, the VR6 Golf, Clive's literally working on it now. He's just working on a fabricated screen wash tank. This was a build we started quite a few years ago, just got back onto recently. We tried to do a really sort of clean, minimal engine bay on it. And one of the things we wanted to try and make a nicer job of was the screen wash tank. Now we've got the brake fluid and clutch fluid reservoirs in the offside scuttle area, and there's a sort of matching gap on the near side here, so we thought it'd be nice to make a little sculpted tank for the screen wash on this side. So Clive's just making a stainless steel tank for that. We're going to paint that body coloured when it's done. So it sort of blends in. That's kind of been the theme on this car throughout. I think the guy we're doing it for literally said, although this sounds bad, I want it to basically look bland, bland but classy. So everything's kind of dulled down, dark interior. You know, engine bay. There's no bling in the engine bay. It's all just black anodised or body coloured. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Utah. So we were just doing the exhaust last week. James was doing the exhaust fabrication, which is now finished. The exhaust is completely done on that. Did a really nice kind of slash cut tip on the exhaust, actually slashed at the angle the body sits at where it flows around that area, which works really well. I hadn't really got a clear picture in my mind of how we were going to do the tailpipe. I was thinking maybe just literally a straight pipe either cut or with a rolled lip on it. And James suggested slashing it off at the actual body angle, which works really well. So that's nice to see that sort of finished off. Other things on this, the brake fluid reservoir arrived back from anodising. We did a machined billet brake fluid reservoir, and that went off for anodising with various other things. So the screen support and mount for the Stratos was one thing. If you're thinking back a few episodes ago, we were looking at that. We've got a 9-inch digital screen in there, which basically gives you all of your instrumentation. And that's on this really cool kind of up and over support on the back of it that's a machine piece. So that was being anodised at the same time. Also the air filter back plate for this. I think last time we saw Trev was just welding the air temperature sensor boss into it, and that was the last job, ready to send that off for anodising. So that was another thing. And then the little tiny brackets that we made to mount the horn grills on this. Now the actual grills themselves are away being chromed at the minute, along with various other bits, which we're all very excited about seeing back. We've done a trial for the wheel colour as well. So we showed, I think last week, that we got the image billet wheels, which are kind of a reference back to the Dunlop steel wheels. We've got a colour in mind. The owner was really happy with it in pictures. I'm really happy with it. So we've just done a speed shape spray out of that colour to send to him, because he's already got a sample of the exterior colour and the leather colour. So he can have a bit of a look at that and make sure he's 100% happy before we go ahead. But hopefully he will be. And I would imagine if he is, then next week we'll paint the wheels. I've got the tyres here already, so we should be able to get that on its finished wheels in their finished colour next week with a bit of luck. The guy from Autodesk has made really good progress with modelling the overrider design, so we'll probably show you that next time when he's finished the drawings for that. But he showed me a sneak preview of where he got to with that, which looked incredible, so fair play on that. And I think that's about where we're at on this. We're going to be taking it back off the ramp next week to do the exhaust fabrication on the Manta, and that'll give us the opportunity then to finish the door build up and get on with some of the interior work which we're waiting on. I'll mention this now actually. Last week you probably saw the advert tagged on the end of the video for Retro Rides Weekender. It's a really cool event down in Goodwood which we used for our 10th anniversary. I'm guessing it feels like only yesterday, but I bet with COVID and everything else going on it must have been 2 years ago. And the next event is actually the end of this month, May. And I think I'm probably not the only one who will be very glad to go to a car show and just hang out with car people for a bit. It's a really cool show, so I'm just going to stick that advert in now, and then let's pick up with the Jensen. So Jensen CV8. This has been loads of action on this week. Rich has been doing a lot of the fiberglass work, so we were obviously getting the final body position last week when Nat was showing you what was going on. So we've sort of rewinding back. We've got the chassis set up on our select jig here. The jig bed's set level, and obviously we set the chassis centrally and level on that jig. And there's a massive benefit to that in that because you know the chassis is level and central on the jig, you can reference all dimensions to the jig. And also because it's level, you can use a self-leveling laser to basically take references vertically and horizontally. So using that laser, we've been getting the body set up onto the chassis, making sure it's absolutely central side to side, and then starting to do some of the revisions on it. Now it's amazing how crudely these were put together originally. There's just massive packers and spacers used just about everywhere, and it seems like if you look at different ones, they seem to use whatever they had to hand. So there's bits of felt packing in some of them, bits of rubber packing in some of them, bits of wood packed in some areas. But obviously because we're moulding a new body for it, it gives us the opportunity to get everything to be a perfect fit. So at the moment we're in the stages of basically remoulding all of the flanges that make the body to the chassis in exactly the right place, so there's no need for any packing or adjustment on it. So we've got the laser set up to get the body central on the jig and level on the jig, and we've done all sorts of reference dimensions on it. And at the moment, Rich is in the process of remodelling all the mating flanges. So we completely cut off the flange that runs up the inside of the quarter panel over the wheel arch. We've basically got it sat on here now with no flange there at all. And Rich is just in the process now of remaking a new fiberglass flange onto the body there. We've altered the flange back here. Now there was probably a 15, maybe slightly less, half-inch thick gap between the boot floor area of the chassis and the mating flange on the body there. To be honest, rather than remaking that flange completely, we've literally just filled the gap between the two, because obviously when we take the mould off this, it'll only be moulded from one side of that wodge of filler, so it will not, that'll be lost in the remoulding of the new body, so it'll just be a clean, thin flange on the carbon body we're going to have made. So he's also done a fair bit of work on the front, so we obviously remodelled the shape of the bulkhead completely, and we've got to change the shape of the fiberglass to meet up with that. Now we took into account the shape of the original body there when we did the bulkhead, so it didn't sit massively proud of the most forward section, but originally there's a section each side that kicks back, and we're basically extending those sections forward to follow the exact profile of the body. So at the moment Rich has done a section flange which mates up with the top of our bulkhead, which is kind of the foundation of what he's working on. You can see he's covered the bulkhead there in vinyl to stop it sticking, and then when he laid up that fiberglass there, he basically laid it up and then sealed it on, butyl tape around it, sealed plastic over it and vacuumed it to make sure it was pulled really nice and tight onto that bulkhead and to get any air bubbles out. And then with that bit done, he's now putting some temporary support material on the outside, which is literally just hot glued on sections of fiberglass or plastic, which he'll then be able to lay up the fiberglass onto the inside of, so that the exterior, the bit that's on that plastic will obviously be nice and flat and smooth, which will be the eventual A surface, as they call it, the visible surface. So basically it's just going through the motions of infilling that section to the revised shape that we want, so it matches up with the new bulkhead. So he's going to carry on with that, and once we've got all of the flanges remade and the body then bolted to the chassis in the place we want it, then we'll start looking at the modification areas around this rear valance and the subtle changes we're making elsewhere. One of the changes I don't know if we mentioned previously was the roof. So this car's obviously had a massive Webasto sunroof in it. And that triggered a bit of a thought when we first got the car here, wouldn't it be cool to do a glass roof on it? And that is the plan. So last week, Alistair, and I apologise, but I can't remember his name, the guy who works with Alistair at A2P2, went over to Ron's place where there was a good non-sunroof car there, so we could 3D scan the roof. So we've got a complete 3D scan model of a non-sunroof CV8 roof. And from that, we're then going to create a CAD model of a glass panel which follows that exact profile. And we're also going to generate CAD models for some tooling which will be used to lay up a fiberglass recess into this body to basically create the recess that the glass panel is going to be bonded into. Now, of course, that recess eventually will be in our new body, but we need to create it on this one. So when we take a mould of this body, obviously it has that recess already built into it. So there'll be a two-piece MDF tool we're going to get machined, which will, one half of it will sit on top of the roof, and it'll have effectively the shape of the glass recessed or dropped out of the bottom of it to sort of mimic the piece of glass sitting there. There'll be a second part that clamps up from underneath to clamp the roof into the right profile all the way around. And then we'll be able to lay up fiberglass from underneath up onto the side of that sort of mimicked piece of glass to create a recess that's exactly the right depth, so that when we have the final body here, our piece of glass will go in, be bonded into place and sit completely flush all the way around. So challenging, but exciting, and the plan hopefully is that that glass will also have a film within it that we can electrically darken or lighten, so you can basically have an opaque roof or a completely clear roof. So that's where we're at with that. I think we've done a few other bits of metalwork. We're starting to look forward to the plumbing and electrical wiring side of things, so we've done some threaded bosses across the front cross member, which is where the power steering lines are going to run and some of the wiring's going to run. Nat's got the Interceptor front hubs and suspension arms all built up, with a view to us getting a set of wheels on this, because it's not going to be too long that we want to get it off the jig and onto a temporary set of wheels, so that we can judge how we want the body shape to look versus the width of wheel that we know we want to use on it. So that's where we're at with that. And finally, the brake pedal box. We're kind of looking forward to getting the owner down here so we can do a trial sitting in it. And obviously we want to get the steering wheel in place. We've already done the column for that. We want to get a seat in place, which we're just in the process of sorting, and we want to get the pedals in. So Nat's got an Interceptor pedal box, because that was a good basis that mates up with the flat bulkhead of the CV8, because it's very similar in that area, but it has a slightly better pedal ratio, so you've got a slightly more force at the master cylinder for a given pedal pressure. And then we're going to do a custom pedal arm that sits into that pedal box to get the pedal position that we want. And I believe the plan at the minute is possibly to use a Jaguar master cylinder. We obviously want to use a master cylinder that's an off-the-shelf, new, available item. And I think the final thing Tom's working on, probably over there in the background, is the electric window lifters. We decided we'd have a look at some Defender window lifter mechs, just as something that looks a very simple to mount, straightforward electric lifter that's a traditional kind of tooth segment with a lifter arm, that we could literally replace the original mechanical lifter with. And that looks really promising. I think we can refabricate the part of the door where the original lifter mech used to mount, and hopefully retrofit the Defender lifter to then work with all the original glass mechanisms. So that hopefully will go smoothly. One more metalwork thing, which I nearly forgot, and it was a fairly substantial part of Tom's time last week, or earlier this week as well actually, was the transmission tunnel. Now originally on these there is a bolt-in fiberglass section of the transmission tunnel, which basically goes from the bulkhead to pretty much where the back seat area is, and covers the gearbox there. And because our gearbox is a slightly different size to the original, it doesn't need to be exactly the same shape. And also, we were quite keen to mount some components off that. We're going to have a centre console in there, and we're going to have the shifter down there. And we wanted to be able to mount that onto something fairly substantial. So we were thinking, well, we could do a steel tunnel. And then we thought, well, actually, does it need to be bolted in? And actually, there's nothing at all on the top of that gearbox that you can access from the top anyway. So there's absolutely no need for it to be removable in this instance. So we thought, well, we might as well just make a transmission tunnel and weld it in as a solid part to add a bit more strength to the shell there. So Tom's made up a really nice transmission tunnel, which is now stitched into place, which, yeah, hopefully will not only give us a little bit more rigidity to the body, but also a nice place where we can do some decent mounts for our shifter, and we'll weld in mounts there for the centre console. So that's where we're at with that. Let's go and have a look at the Morris. One thing I will say, it's not related really to the Morris, but of course, everybody's been saying, where's Stu? But needless to say, in the last few episodes, we've been walking past a car on the way in here, which every time we've said, this is a project we can't show you. You know, we can't always show every project that we're working on. So of course, Stu hasn't been in the last few episodes because he's been working on that car, so we can't show the work he's been doing. But as of next week, you'll probably see a lot more of him because that car has now reached completion of metalwork. That'll be going through to the body shop. And into its place will be going the Land Cruiser, which we've obviously touched on already. But that will now have a space in the fabrication area, and we're going to get cracking with progress on that. And I think Stu will be doing the majority of the work on that. Scott has been on with the Morris. So the thing he's on with at the moment is the aircon condenser. I've probably mentioned before that one of the challenges with this car is the amount of things we've got to package into a very small space. And the front end's no exception. We showed you before the mock-up radiator we've got in there. Scott's now done the oil cooler mounts for the engine oil cooler, and he's just working on the AC condenser mount. So that basically then takes up all of the space in front of the radiator. There'll then be an electric fan on the back of the radiator, and that pretty much takes up all the space at the front. And also, just to add even more things into that front space, one of the things we wanted to include, A, for better lighting, and B, because it was a cool feature in our original design renderings for this car, was a pair of spotlights recessed into each side of that grille at the very side area where there's not really any detriment to the airflow. So we've got a set of Sibi Mini Oscar LED spotlights, which Scott's just been fabricating the mounts for those at the front there, and that looks really cool. So happy with that. And I think Stu's also been working on the boot hinges. So we've deleted all of the external hinges that this used to have. The bonnet, as you've probably seen previously, flips forwards and is hinged at the front. The boot lid's going to open the normal way, opening up at the back, but we're going to have internal hinges, and it's just working out how they're going to work and making sure they're not going to clash with the space the fuel tank takes up. Nat had previously designed the fuel tank for this. So he's got a CAD drawing of how that's going to be. So Stu's just been referencing that drawing and making sure that the space the hinges go into when the boot lid is shut doesn't interfere with that space. But that's looking good as well. So that's the latest on that. Let's have a stroll through here. Finally got to the end of the fiberglass body kit filler work misery on the Chevette. It's been a long old slog. It's basically that stage we've probably talked about before, where it's almost sculpture, trying to make a fiberglass kit that is in no way dimensionally accurate in any part, actually be dimensionally accurate, fit the shell properly, all the components fit together properly, and you pretty much end up, sculpting all of those joins and mating surfaces again to actually make the kit fit properly. But we got to the end of that last week, in fact earlier this week, and got the kind of first all over single colour coating on, which is always a bit of a morale booster when you kind of get to see it all one colour. You can see the wood for the trees, and it's a bit more plain sailing now, where it's essentially just blocking down through finer grades on this polyester coat that we've got on it now on the exterior. With that done, the guys are now working on the underside and the inside. So I think yesterday and the day before they've done the underside, so all of the seam sealing work. A little bit of filler work as well, just where there's the odd little distorted area. We want it to look nice underneath as well, so a little bit of filler work on the underside just to iron out any wrinkles on the underside. And then they're just working on the inside, same process, smoothing out any imperfections and critically seam sealing everything and just keying everything up. Motorsport builds tend to be harder on the inside. I mean, a lot of the cars we're doing, they're fully upholstered, so we just give them basically key everything up and then go over with U-Pol Raptor or a similar polyurethane coating, which is really tough. But obviously on a motorsport type build like this, where it's going to be largely bare inside, you've got to properly prep everything to get a decent paint finish on the inside, which in a lot of cases, especially when there's a roll cage in there, isn't the easiest job in the world. So I don't really envy Gaz's final paint job on the inside of this. But yeah, good progress on that. All the panels are now in polyester as well, so it's finishing all the prep on the inside, starting to block down that polyester on the outside and on all the panels, and then they'll work towards probably then doing the Raptor on the underside, and getting the whole shell then in a epoxy primer, which is the last step before final paint. So I can't wait to see that. I think on that note, that's probably it for this week. So we'll see you again next time. Have a good weekend. Bye.